Hey everybody, it's Murray here and welcome back to my channel, M Stuart Paintings. On today's acrylic landscape painting tutorial for beginners, we're going to paint this gorgeous landscape. I'm going to teach you how to block in your painting and create realistic paint recipes so you can paint using colours to push things back and to bring things forward and create realism in your artwork. I'm going to teach you how to paint clouds and how to create highlights and shadows on them to make them look super realistic so you can paint this really nice landscape painting for beginners. So let's get into it. So it's a really nice easy tutorial today. You're going to need the following colours. They are titanium white, cad yellow, sap green, raw sienna. If you haven't got raw sienna you can use orange, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, dioxide purple, raw umber and matte black. Now I've got a canvas that I've painted burnt sienna and I've just used cobalt blue and some burnt sienna just to create an outline. I've blocked in a large hay bale here in the foreground. We're going to have some far off hay bales, we're going to have some far away fields, and we're going to have this gigantic cloud in the background. I'm going to teach you how to paint a realistic clouds because I know a lot of people struggle with that. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to start at the back of the painting. So we're going to paint the sky and we're going to work our way forward. So we're going to mix some cerulean blue, cobalt blue and lots and lots and lots of white. So cerulean blue, which is more turquoisey, cobalt blue, which is more cool, and lots of white. And all we're going to do is just at the base of our horizon and at the lower part we're just going to block in over this burnt sienna a nice light pastel sky. Now you don't have to paint your canvas burnt sienna, I just find it easier because acrylics are water based and it just shows me where I've missed bits of my canvas because I can see some of the orange shining through. So all we're doing, we're just blocking it in. Don't worry if it's messy. We just want to block it in with that light shade of blue. So use plenty of paint on your brush and just try to cover up as much of the sky as you can. But as I say, we want to have the nice lighter blue at the bottom of the sky, and we'll get darker as we move up into the painting. Now excuse if you can hear some wind, there's a crazy storm here in London today. There's a storm, so if you can hear some wind and banging, it's just the outside weather. So we're just getting dark as we move up. So we've mixed cerulean blue, cobalt blue and just a little bit less white now and a little bit more cobalt blue, just because cobalt blue is a bit cooler. We're still going to have some cerulean blue, but we want a little bit of cobalt blue, a bit more, just to make it this nice cooler. And we're going to add a dot of brown, so a dot of raw umber. Now you can use burnt umber or raw umber, but you just want to add a dot of brown just to create this lovely realistic sky colour. And all we're going to do, look, while it's wet, we're just going to create X shapes with our brushes and come down into the lighter shade of blue, and we're just going to blend it together. So what it should do is look like the sky is fading. So just create X shapes. So look, load up your brush, just start in the corners, work your way down. We just want to block in the painting. So use plenty of paint. And as I say, as you move into the lighter shade of blue, just create X shapes, just ease up a little bit of the pressure, and you can just blend, look, just blend the two shades of blue together, and it should look like the sky is fading off into the distance. So super easy trick to create realism. So just trying to block as much, just want to get all that canvas covered. There we go. Let's get all that burnt sienna covered away. Hooray! So now we've got our sky with this nice transition from a lighter blue into a darker blue into the top corners. we can start blocking in the rest of the painting. So we've got this nice transition and we can just blend it together. Look, just blending it gently together. So we've got the lighter shade at the bottom and the darker shade at the top. So now we're going to use raw sienna. Now raw sienna is just a very orangey brown. So if you haven't got raw sienna, I know a lot of people don't have necessarily the access, you can add brown and orange together to get this colour. So brown and orange. And all we're going to do, we're going to add a little bit of blue to the mix. So we're just going to add a little bit of cobalt blue to some brown and some orange. And all we're going to do, we're just going to make this round sort of circular shape, and this is going to be the shadow area of our hay bale. So we're going to have some hay bales and we're going to have some faraway fields, and it will just create a focal point for the viewer, and then we'll have this great big cloud in the middle as a central point for the viewer to look at. So just some hay bales in the foreground. So all you want to do is just look, we've got a dark shadow colour, and if you want to create yellow, orange and brown, so yellow, orange and brown, if you haven't got raw sienna, we're just going to create a light sort of tan colour, and we're just going to mix a tiny bit of the darker colour into it, just a tiny bit, and we're just going to create sort of the roll of this hay bale. So if you imagine it's got its back to the sun, we're going to have the sun coming from the left, I think, and it'll be coming over the hay bale. So we're just going to add some more white and yellow. So we're just going to make a creamy sort of tan colour now, and we're just going to have that sort of sunlight coming over the top and just create the roundness of that hay bale. So a really easy trick. As I say, we're just trying to block everything in. We're not worried about any detail or anything. We just want to have everything where we want it to be. So we're going to mix some brown and blue together. So cobalt blue and some raw umber. A little bit of white. And a little bit of sap green. So a little bit of white and a little bit of sap green. I'm going to add a bit more cobalt blue. Now cobalt blue is really, really good for pushing things back. So what it does is it desaturates your colours and it makes them look far off into the distance. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to get some of this lovely sort of greeny blue and brown, and I'm just going to put sort of a near sort of hedge line. So if you imagine loads of faraway bushes and hedge lines, and in the distance what we can do is we can create some faraway fields. So we can just have some little sort of trees and areas. We get some faraway fields. So these are sort of faraway hedges and trees, just to create again just a little bit of detail. We're not going to put much detail on because I want this tutorial to be for beginners, but I do want to teach you all the recipes for making all these realistic colours. So we're just going to add a little bit of blue to some brown and orange. So a little bit of blue and some brown and orange. And all we're going to do is we're going to block in sort of the shadow underneath colour for our corn and hay. So what we're going to do, we're going to have a sort of a lovely sort of field of hay. And what we're trying to do is we're just trying to create a dark shadow colour underneath, and then we'll put the highlights on top. So with acrylics it's easier to put the dark shadow tones on first and then put the highlights over the top. So all we want to do is we just want to create sort of the sort of soil colour, and then we'll create sort of the hay and the detail in the foreground at the end. So if I zoom in for you so you can see better, we're going to take some sap green and a little bit of yellow and a tiny bit of purple, and we're just going to create sort of a olive colour, and then we're just going to put a little bit of cobalt blue. So as I say, cobalt blue is fantastic for pushing things back and to make them look far off into the distance. So cobalt blue and a little bit of purple you can just add to your greens, and it just makes them just look a bit more less saturated, and it just makes them look more realistic. So it's great for pushing far away sort of valleys and trees and things like that. So all I'm doing, look, I'm just blocking it in. We're not going to put any detail on just yet. Just want to sort of create shapes of faraway fields. So if you imagine with a landscape painting, you want to have something in the foreground, so that's what we're using, the hay bale, but we want to have just the illusion of detail in the background. So by using things like the cobalt blue with these greens, we can push these fields far off into the distance, and then we can bring with the darker tones. See, we've got this really dark tone on our hay bale, so I'm just mixing some purple and blue and a little bit of sap green. So purple, blue and sap green, and a little bit of white. So you can see here with the hay bale, we're using really dark colours in the foreground, and we're using much more things like these blues and greens and purples in the background. And what this does is, look, if we just create, say, a far off mountain here, this blue, because it's so pastel, what it does is it pushes it far back into the distance. So it just looks like a valley or a hill in the far distance. So if I zoom back, you can see now how using dark colours nearer to the viewer brings things forward, and using sort of cobalt blues and these sort of pastel colours push things back. So first we're going to block in our clouds now. Now a lot of people have been asking us how to paint realistic clouds. They say, a lot of people say they struggle with clouds, so I thought, why not create a really large cloud, and I can teach you really easy paint recipes to mix, and you can use them for any cloud. So we're going to mix purple, cobalt blue and a dot of blacks and a little bit of brown. So purple, cobalt blue, a dot of black and a little bit of brown, and we're just going to add plenty of white to the mix. Okay, so this is going to be our shadow colour. So we're going to block in just like we've done with the soil and the dirt in the foreground. We're just going to block in our clouds. So the reason we want to add a little bit of purple, blue and black is we want to create this sort of pastel grey purple colour. And all we're going to do, we're just going to create circles, push down on your brush and just gently create circles with your brush, and we're just going to spread the paint into a shape of a large cloud. So look, all I'm doing is creating circles. Now what will happen by creating circles is some shades of your paint will be a little bit darker and some shades of your paint will be a bit lighter. So what you can do, if you create circles, you can just create the sort of wispiness of the clouds. So look, if you just load up your brush and just create circles, look at that. And as I say, some dirty bits of the paint where it's a bit darker will create a bit of shadows, and some of the lighter shades where it's got a bit more of the white will create some highlights. So all I'm doing, I'm just creating shapes of clouds by creating these little circles. So again, by using this cool sort of purpley colour, we're putting the shadows on first, and then what we'll do is we'll use brighter whites and light blues, and we'll put the highlights over the top. So as I say, don't worry if it's scruffy, we're just going to block it in first. So I'm creating these round circle shapes, just try and create the fluffiness of my clouds. I just want to cover up all this burnt sienna. And I say, don't worry if you go over your hay bale or your mountains in the far distance. We'll neaten everything up in a minute. We just want to block the whole painting in, and then once we've gauged the colours and we know where everything's going to be, we can start working on all the detail. So take your time, relax. And what you can do, as I say, is you can take away all these sort of paint colours, these recipes for creating things like far off mountains, far off trees and clouds, and you can apply them to your own artwork. So there we go, and just creating these circle shapes. And then finally the bottom corner, we'll just block in. As I say, don't worry if you cover up the mountain, we'll neaten everything up in a minute. We just want to block in our cloud. Easy peasy. So that's looking fantastic. So what we're going to do, we're going to start putting highlights on it. So we're going to have more white, and we're going to put some of the horizon colour. Do you remember which was cobalt blue, cerulean blue, and lots of white? And then we're going to wipe away most of the paint on our brush, and we're just going to create circles. So look, all I'm doing, if the light's coming from the left hand side, we've got a dry brush, so this has got hardly any water on my brush, and I've got barely any paint, and all I'm doing is just pushing down extremely gentle on the left hand side of the cloud. So all I'm trying to do is just create texture in our cloud. So I'm leaving gaps in the underpainting in that, so I'm leaving gaps in that nice sort of pastel purple that we just created, and now we're adding this highlight, look, just on the left corner of the cloud. So I just want to make this really nice and emphasize it, and then just blending it in really gently. So I've got hardly any paint. Look, I'm just doing the circle trick again, and I'm just blending the acrylic paints together. So the two shades, just like we did with the sky, we're just blending the lighter shade into the darker shade, and it should look like a highlight where the sunlight is coming from the left hand side, and because we've got the nice shadow colour on the right hand side, it will make it look 3D. So look, all we're doing, we're just loading up our brush, we're adding a tiny bit more white, we're just creating these little circles, we're just trying to give the left side of the cloud, make it really nice and wispy. Just blend it in. So just relax. Just create little intricate circles with your brush. Apply hardly any pressure. Now the wonderful thing about acrylic paints is they pick up some of the colour from underneath. So that white and the light blue tint, what it'll do, it will take some of that purple that we've just laid down, and while we blend it in, so as we're blending it in with our circle technique, it will naturally pick up a bit of the undercolour. So we're just trying to blend it, we don't want to have too harsh a jump. And then what we'll do is when it dries, we'll start adding more highlights over the top. So what we want to do, we just want to leave gaps in the underpainting, just so we can create the illusion of texture within the cloud. So look, all I'm doing, if you can see closely, I'm just smudging it with my finger. I just don't want any harsh edges. I want to make these clouds really soft. So let's put a little divot in this one. So we're going to do the same trick. So we're going to have the light look from the left hand side, and it'll be coming round here just to make this nice and highlighted. So why not? And then we'll just have a sort of divot here, make it all sort of fluffy and marshmallow. So look, same trick, just going round, creating the circles, leaving little gaps just to create the texture, some of the underpaint shine through. So we're just creating little divots in the cloud with this really pastel colour. So look, you can do it at the base of the cloud as well. So you can look, you can just use this light colour because it's got a little bit of the white in it. It's just a shade lighter, and you can just create texture in your cloud. So it's really, really subtle. Look, we're just putting little divots. Again, it's just to create texture. I haven't got a reference photo. I'm just doing this out of my head. But you can, if you struggle, take photos of clouds on your phone or your camera and then use them as a reference photo. So all we're doing, look, it's really, really subtle. Oh, the wind outside is crazy. I don't know if you can hear it. We have a storm here in London, which has been up to 100 miles an hour winds. It's been crazy. So look, all we're going to do, we're going to add more white and less of the cerulean and cobalt blue. And we're just starting to make even brighter highlights. So what I'm going to do, just at the base of where the mountains and the clouds meet, I'm just going to create a little bit of a highlight, just create a little bit of a divide, just so there's a clear gap between the mountains, the sky and the clouds. So it's still got a tiny hint of the blue in it, the horizon colour. So again, it's just really subtle. We just poking some gaps, just so it looks like some of the light sky is shining through. So again, if you have hardly any water on your brush, you can just blend it really gently, just so you have all these transitions are really, really subtle, not harsh. So there we go. So we're going to get some purple and a little bit of the brown, the darker brown, the raw umber, and a little bit of cobalt blue. So we're just going to make a dark shadow tone. Just going to add some white. So purple and blue are really good for cools, for shadows. So what I'm going to do, I've got a dry brush. I'm going to wipe away 90% of the paint off my brush. I'm going to have just a tiny bit. And just sort of like a crayon, I'm just going to glaze this corner area. So if you imagine one side of the cloud on the left hand side is getting all the sunlight, and on the right hand side it's going to be more in the shade. So by just mixing some of this purple and blue and wiping away 95% of the paint, so we've got hardly any paint, you can almost just glaze areas of your cloud just to add some shadows. So again, this is just to create some texture. So we just want to brush over the canvas, but basically not pushing down very hard. We're just gradually easing up on the brush. So look, we're just creating some shadow on the right hand side, and again just creating some little divots. They're really, really subtle. So if you think it's really easy to create these paint recipes, and then you just want to pick a side of your cloud where you want the sunlight, and then you want to pick another side of the cloud where you want the shade. So what we're going to do, we're going to do the exact same trick. I've just cleaned my brush, and now I've got just pure titanium white. So I've got no blue in this white. And all I'm going to do, I'm just got a dry brush, I'm just going to gently glaze the left hand side. So just like we did with the shadow, we're just going to add the highlights now. So again, because we've put this sort of medium tone on first, we've put this lighter bluey white on first. Now that we're adding this bright white onto the left, it gradually blends. It's not as harsh, because we've got this sort of in-between tone that sort of ties it together. And you can even have little like floater clouds that sort of break away from the main cloud. So, but you just want to create your circles and just push down really gently, just ease up on the pressure. You just want to really highlight the left hand side of your cloud, just to emphasize the sunlight. And by having the highlights on one side and then having the shadows on the other side, it just gives your work that realism, but it's really, really easy to do. So look, we're just going to go over this part of the cloud that we just did, but now it's just the pure white. So I'm just wiping away most of the paint. I'm just creating those circles. I'm just emphasizing the highlights. Just gradually, look, just creating these circles and blending it into the previous colour. And because the brush is really dry, it's really, really soft bristles, I can just lighten areas up or darken areas, whatever you want to do. So let's do some over here. So if the light's coming from the left, we're just going to make this area all wispy and lovely. So it's really, really easy. I know I used to struggle with clouds a lot. It's a really hard one, I think, trying to paint clouds. So hopefully this tutorial will show you, if you put the shadow colour on first and then you start putting the highlights over the top and you start blending the colours together, it's really easy to create the realism. So look, what you can do is get a dry brush and just create your circles. Just gradually push down onto the canvas, hardly any pressure. So look, just little circles, and because you've got hardly any paint and you've got this really soft brush, you can just create some breakaway clouds. So look, we'll just wipe away most of the paint, so I've just got this chalky residue. I'm just going to create some little breakaway clouds just in the sky, just so it looks like they're fading off into the distance. So easy peasy, really easy technique. And then what you can do is, when your cloud is dry, because acrylics dry really quick, you can just get a fine liner, like a small brush, and just get some pure titanium white and just go around the edges just to make your cloud look more sharp and highlighted. So same technique, just doing the little circles, but now the painting is dry. With acrylics, if you want to emphasize your highlights, if you just go over the top with the white, you can make them just look more brighter just by giving them a second coat of paint. So what I'm doing, I'm just going around the edges just to give it a nice sharp edge. So real easy technique. And a lot of time you just got to gauge it, you've just got to see if it needs more white or if it doesn't. So just going back and forth on your artwork. So we'll just do the same on this ridge that we did before. You can even do some at the bottom here. So just like before, we were just poking holes in the sky, just giving it a little bit more detail. So what I'm doing is just poking some lines at the bottom, and it just looks like they're fading away. Now we're going to paint back in the mountains in the far distance. So it was blue, purple, so cobalt blue, purple, and some sap green and a little bit of brown. And we're going to use plenty of cobalt blue. So this is a great paint recipe, a little bit of white to push your far back mountains into the distance. So by using plenty of cobalt blue, what it does is it desaturates all the colour and makes it look like these mountains are fading off into the distance. So all I'm doing, I'm just using a small headed brush, just a fine liner, and now we've got our clouds all blocked in and we're happy with them. We can just put back in this nice ridge. So this could be a far off sort of tree line or mountains in the valley. So again, there's no real detail, it's using colours, it's trying to learn how to use your palette to create the detail, so to create the realism using colours. So you can do this for any scene. If you want to push something far back into the distance, just use plenty of cobalt blue, and you can make cliffs or mountains, trees, anything far off into the distance. So there we go, we've got our mountains all back and blocked in. And while we've got that colour, we're just going to create sort of some faraway hedges and trees. Just sort of some fake detail in the background. So we're just using that colour just to imply some hedges or some tree lines in the background. When you get sort of fields, you get these sort of little diagonal hedge lines that go across the valleys. So we're just going to create that. So just add a little bit more sap green to the mix. So I'm just creating a distance or hedge line. So just like before, I'm putting the shadow colour on first, and then I'm going to put the highlights over the top. So what I'm doing, I'm just shading in this area, just making it nice and dark, and then I'm going to mix some yellow into the mix. So yellow and purple and a tiny bit of sap green creates an olive colour, but if you have a tiny bit of purple in it, it just sucks again some of the colour out, and you get this sort of lovely sort of olive colour that's not too bright, and again it's perfect for using for faraway fields. So if you wanted to have some faraway fields of crops, this is absolutely perfect. So now we've got that dark colour in, I'm just using it to shade in this lighter colour and just leave little gaps just to imply some faraway hedges and stuff. And then you can even use, look, you can use the dark colour once it's dry. Mine's still a bit wet, that's why it's not showing up so much. But once it's a little bit drier, if you just get the dark colour like before, and you can just make it a little bit darker seeing it's wet. So we're just going to add more cobalt blue. Look, you can even just put in some hedge lines in the far distance. So just put some little diagonals, and these just look like little divides where you have little trees and fences that create these sort of faraway fields. And we'll just make this a little bit rougher, just so it looks like faraway trees. So again, look, there's no detail, it's just creating the impression. So when you stand back, obviously we're very zoomed in, but when you stand back from the painting it will look really realistic simply from the colours. So I'm just shading in with this blue. I think that green was just a bit too green. So by using the blue, like I said before, you can just make it look further back. Just put in that olive green just to make it look a bit neater. So now we zoomed out, we've got this nice pushback cloud, we've got this nice hay bale in the foreground, and we're starting to use darker tones, see, like here on the hay bale, to bring it forward, to bring it towards the viewer. So we're going to mix some blue and brown, so some cobalt blue and some burnt umber, and we're just going to neaten up our hay bale. So we're using our darkest darks now, and this will bring this really towards the viewer. So now we've got these soft pastel colours for the clouds, and we've got these blues for the background fields. These nice dark browns, shadows, will bring this hay bale really close to the viewer. Now there's the subscribe button. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. Thank you so much to everyone who's subscribed already and supporting the channel. The channel is growing really quickly, so it's really helpful for other artists to see the tutorials, so thank you so much. So look, all I'm doing here, I'm just putting in the impression of some shadow, and I'm just putting the impression of some shadows in the crops. So again, I'm just using that blue and brown just to imply some detail. But again, we're not going to go too detailed. This landscape painting's for beginners. So we just want to work on the colours really today. So we can have some faraway hay bales put back in. So I'm just using that shadow colour. So what I'm doing is creating little barrel shapes. So all I'm doing here, I'm just using a fine liner and I'm just creating the impression of texture in our sort of crop here in the soil. So I'm just creating the illusion of lines. So again, it's just to put the shadows on first before we put all the highlights. So just having a few lines, and we could do it here on the hay bale. So all I'm doing, I'm just adding sort of the texture to imply all the straw. So if you take some raw sienna, and if you haven't got raw sienna, if you take orange and a little bit of brown just to make it, and then just add some purple, a little bit of cobalt blue, you can just create a lighter shade. Because the orange is just a little bit lighter, you can just blend it into that dark blue and blue and brown, excuse me. And all we're trying to do is just texturize the sort of straw on the hay bale. And if we get some yellow, a little bit of the raw sienna or orange and brown, some white, so yellow, orange and brown and white, and a dab of purple, we can make a highlight. So if you imagine, if the light is coming from the left hand side, so for our clouds, on our highlights on our clouds, we want to imply that on the hay bale. So again, by just going over the top. And the great thing about acrylic paints is they dry so quick, so you can just add highlights over the top. You don't have to really wait. All this is dry, so we can just shade it in. And again, we're just texturizing it. We're just leaving little gaps in the previous color just to imply the straw. And just going to outline it, make sure it's nice and round. Where we've put in the background, we just want to make sure it all looks nice and tidy. And if you have any harsh outlines, look, you can just go over the top, just smooth them out. You can just blend it. So look, any harsh outlines, just try to paint over. And then if we get some of the orange and brown and just add it to a little bit of blue and brown just to cool it down, we can create a spiral shape. So think of your thumb impression, your thumbprint. You have that little spiral going around your thumb. So we're just going to create a sort of spiral shape. Again, we're just going to blur it. We don't want it too harsh, just to imply some detail. And we should have, once I zoom back out, I'm just making this highlight look a little bit prettier, a texturized hay bale. So the great thing is because the dark colour in the circle emphasises the shadow, and then we've got the highlight going over the top, and you can even use this colour, look, just to highlight the far away ones. So you can use the highlight colour just to have the dark on the roll part of it, and just put the yellow to create the barrel effect. And you can just use colour. See, look, using colour to imply detail. So perfect for beginners. There's no detail. It's more in the colours. Learning these paint recipes, and as I say, you can apply this as your drawing and painting gets better and you get more detailed. You can apply all these colours to your own work. It's learning how light works, how colours work. So look, as I say, just like the clouds, just by adding a little bit of white to the mix, just emphasise this highlight, make it look shinier. So we're going to swap over to a fan brush. Now a fan brush is entirely the same shape as its name. It's a fan shape. We're going to mix some yellow, some burnt umber and purple. So yellow, burnt umber and purple. Tiny bit of the orangey raw sienna, but predominantly yellow. It's just we've got a bit of purple and a bit of brown in there just to make it look more realistic and earthy. So I'm just going to move the painting just so I can get right down to the bottom of the canvas. And all I'm going to do, I'm going to tip the fan brush upwards and I'm going to create the illusion of straw or crop. So this is all the sort of hay sort of growing in the fields. So first we're going to put this darkest sort of browny yellow first. So just as before, we always do the shadow colours first. And all we're doing, if you can see quite clearly, we're just leaving gaps in the underpainting. So we're letting some of the previous colours shine through. We're not covering it all up. we're just creating streaks just to imply, again, texture. So a fan brush is perfect for things like grass. It's perfect for painting things like crops, leaves, trees. So they're a really good investment. They cost about $1 or £1, and because of the texturization of the brush, you can create long grass or crops. It's so easy, it literally does all the work for you. So it's very much worth it. So look, all I'm doing, look, I'm just leaving little imprints with the paint, and I'm leaving little gaps, and it creates the illusion of this crop. So it's super easy peasy. We're just using that dark colour first. And just like before, don't worry if it's scruffy. We can neaten up all our hay bales and our faraway fields if you go over them. You just want to block it all in. So we're going to mix, now we've got the dark colour on first, we're going to mix a little bit more of a highlight. So we're going to add some white and some yellow. Just make it look more creamy and buttery. We're going to load up our fan brush, and we're just going to go over the top, and we're just going to put some highlights in. So these are the little bits of straw and crop in our landscape painting that are getting the sunlight. So where the sunlight is coming from the left, you'll have some of the tips of the grass, sort of the crops, sort of having a little bit of sunlight hit them. And again, it just gives it a little bit more realism. So if you put the shadow colour on first, and then you just go over the top, same technique, look, just leaving little gaps, just creating these scruffy lines, and it just gives the impression of texture. Now the corners we're going to leave dark, so I don't want to paint lots of highlights in the corners, because A, I want to make the painting framed, so I want to darken my corners, but B, especially in the left hand side, I want to sign my work. And I always sign my work normally in white, so I always make my left hand corner dark, just so my signature stands out. So a good easy rule of thumb is always leaves a little gap on the left hand side and make it a little bit darker, and then you can sign it. So we're going to get some brown and some cobalt blue. So brown, cobalt blue and purple. So now we've got this highlight colour. We're just going to make a shadowy colour, and as I say, we're just going to create a shadow coming from the hay bale. So if the light's coming from the left, we're going to create this nice dark shadow. Now I think because the painting is still a bit wet, it's a little bit blurred, it's not as strong as I like, so we'll come back to that later once it's dry. But all I'm doing is just creating some shadows. They're really subtle, and I'm just putting in back in some texture. So as I say, a lot of acrylic painting is going back and forth. It's just, you can make things harsher, you can make things lighter. So look, if something's too harsh, that brown was a bit too dark, you can just use the highlight colour and put it back in. So I always try to leave in mistakes in my tutorials. I always want to show people, if you do something and it doesn't work first time, that's very, very normal with painting. You normally have to feel your way out and see through experimentation what works and what doesn't work. So sometimes, as I say, you go to do something and the paint won't be quite dry, or the colour will be a bit too harsh. So what I'm doing, I'm getting some of that green and blue that we mixed previously. So green and blue, cobalt blue, and a tiny bit of brown, and I'm just neatening up. Now we've blocked in that that field, I'm just making it a little bit more straighter. So I'm just going up. I've got a flat-headed brush, which is perfect for straight lines, and I'm just blocking back in, just so now we've put in the texturization of the crop. I'm just putting our hay bales and our faraway fields back in, just so it's nice and straight, and then we can put the hay bales back in. So as I say, it's just going back and forth. If you change an area and you just want to include something and put things back, it's really easy to do. So we can have a few over here and a few over there. And I'm just getting some of that purple and blue and brown very subtly. I'm just making the left hand corner a little bit darker, because remember that's where I'm going to sign it. And I'm just going to get some yellow, white, tiny bit of orange and some purple, but predominantly white. So lots and lots of white. So just like we did at the top of the hay bale, I'm just going to put some highlights here in the middle. So before we put in our dark shadow that we had before, while it's drying, I'm just going to use a fine liner. So you can use a fan brush or you can use a fine liner. And all we're doing, we're just creating the illusion of some of this crop getting some sunlight. And the reason I'm doing it in the middle is because we've now darkened up our corners. Just like we've got the big cloud in the middle, and we've got our hay bale just slightly off the middle, we've got all the fields, is to get the viewer to look down the middle of the painting. So having some highlights in the middle of your painting, or having something for a viewer to focus on, it just draws the viewer to look straight down the middle of your artwork. It's a good little trick. That's why a lot of the seascapes I put the sun right in the middle, so it has something for the viewer to focus on. So look, all we're doing, we're just putting some highlights on, really subtle, so just take your time. So now we've got the highlights, I want to really emphasize the shadow coming from this hay bale, but unfortunately the painting is still a bit wet. I should have dried it with a hairdryer before I filmed this section. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to put in these little highlights around this shadow, and when it's dry I'll come back to it. So if you want to dry your work ever and then rework areas, so look, I'm trying to put in a shadow but it's just not harsh enough. Remember I was just saying you need to use darker colours in the foreground to really emphasise it, and I think because that blue and brown is just not harsh enough, so I'm just going to get a little bit of purple, blue and brown. I'm just going to shade this corner just to make it nice and dark, and the same on this corner. I've got a dry brush, I've got hardly any paint. Just while the canvas is drying, I'm just making the corners nice and dark. And while it's drying, excuse me, I'm just going to get plenty of white. I'm just going to get a soft round-headed brush, and I'm just going to really emphasize the clouds now. So remember, acrylics are really fast to dry, but once they dry, if you want to really highlight areas and make it look much more vibrant, just go over the top. So all we're doing, look, we're just wiping away most of the paint and we're just smoothing it into the previous colours. Now it's all dry. I'm going to make this light effect on our cloud look really, really striking. So we're just blending it in. The brush is dry, the brush is really soft. You can use a blender brush. You don't have to use expensive brushes, these are just really cheap. But what they are is they're really soft to the touch. So when you're pushing down on the canvas, it's really easy to blend. So look, just lots and lots of white paint. Just wipe away most of it. Have a dry, soft brush. Just gently create the circles and just make your edges nice and vibrant. So let's really emphasize the top. So just like I said, we want to have something in the middle of the canvas for the viewer to focus on. So if we make this part of the cloud really, really bright, that gives something for the viewer to look down the middle. We want to make it nice and wispy, so we're going to do our circle trick just to make it look nice and marshmallowy. And now she's dry, we're going to get the blue and the brown. So plenty of burnt umber or raw umber and cobalt blue. I'm going to use a flat-headed brush. I'm just going to darken up this corner because that's where I'm going to sign it. So I want it nice and dark so my signature stands out. And I'm going to load up my brush and I'm going to go diagonally. So a flat-headed brush I'm using here because it's easier to use to get straight lines, and look how much darker that is. So just like the highlight on the cloud where it's really vibrant, you can make your darks really dark by just going over the top once your painting is dry. And we're just going to glaze the bottom right hand corner again, just to frame the painting, just to make her nice and composed. And just look where it's got a big jump from green to orangey yellow with the crop with the hay. I'm just going to mix some of the do you remember the field colour, which was green, yellow and purple? So I'm just going to mix a little bit of that, and I'm going to add a tiny bit of white, and I'm just going to make it a little bit shade of green, very light olivey green. And I'm just at the top here just going to make it a little bit greener, so there's not so much of a jump between the green fields in the background and the yellow crop in the foreground. So again, it's just using colours to trick the eye and create the realism. So there we go. So I've signed her in the bottom left hand corner. So you've learned how to paint clouds, you've learned how to do a gradient in your sky, how to darken up your corners, you've learned how to block in your work using shadow colours and then put highlights on the top. You've learned how to use darker tones in the foreground to create shadows and realism to bring things closer to you, such as the haystacks, and how to use lighter pastel colours to push things back far off into the distance. So my name's Murray. Thank you so much for watching this acrylic landscape painting tutorial. I've really enjoyed painting along with you guys at home. Please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already to support the channel. And thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely day wherever you are, and happy painting. See you soon, guys. Take care. Bye now.